The thunderous crash of hooves against wood echoed through Millbrook Valley, as another would-be rider flew backward through the stable doors, landing hard in the dust. Inside the shadowy stall, the magnificent stallion reared on his hind legs, his obsidian coat gleaming with sweat and fury, eyes blazing like twin emeralds in the dim light. For 3 years, no human had managed to stay on Tempest's back for more than 8 seconds. "That's the 15th rider this month," muttered Garrett, Holloway, the ranch foreman, as he helped the dazed cowboy to his feet. The defeated man brushed dirt from his torn shirt and shook his head in disgust. "That devil horse ain't worth the trouble," the cowboy spat, limping toward his truck. "You'd be better off selling him to the glue factory." Garrett's weathered face hardened. He'd heard those words too many times lately, and each utterance made his stomach churn. Tempest wasn't just any horse. He was the last living descendant of the legendary Moonrunner bloodline, a lineage of horses so pure and powerful that Arabian princes had once offered fortunes for a single foal. But tragedy had struck the Moonrunner ranch 5 years ago when a wildfire swept through the mountains, killing nearly every horse in the herd. Only Tempest had survived, found days later standing guard over his fallen family, refusing to leave their sides. The trauma had changed him. What was once a gentle, spirited colt became a fortress of rage and pain. Every trainer, every cowboy, every horse whisperer in 3 states had tried to break through his defenses. Some used gentle methods, others harsh ones, but all met the same fate: thrown, kicked, or simply ignored as if they didn't exist. From her hiding spot behind the hay bales, 12-year-old Dove Brightwater watched the latest failure with sad eyes. She'd been coming to the ranch every day for 2 months, not as a visitor or customer, but as the daughter of Maria Brightwater, who cleaned the ranch house in exchange for a small wage and leftovers from the ranch kitchen. While her mother scrubbed floors and washed windows, Dove would slip away to watch Tempest from a distance. Unlike the others who saw a problem to be solved or a beast to be conquered, Dove saw something different in the stallion's furious green eyes. She saw the same hollow ache that lived in her own chest, the pain of loss, the weight of being alone in a world that seemed determined to break you. Dove's father had died in Afghanistan when she was 8, leaving behind nothing but memories and a purple heart that couldn't pay the rent. Her mother worked 3 jobs just to keep their tiny apartment, and Dove had learned early that silence was often safer than speaking, that watching was wiser than acting, that sometimes the most broken things were also the most beautiful, as the sun set behind the mountains, painting the sky in shades of amber and rose. Dove emerged from her hiding place. The ranch hands had gone home, the tourists had departed, and even Garrett had retired to his cabin for the night. Only she and Tempest remained in the growing darkness, 2 damaged souls separated by wooden rails and a lifetime of pain. The stallion stood motionless in his stall, his great head lowered as if bearing an invisible weight. For the first time in months, he wasn't pacing, wasn't striking the walls with his hooves. He was simply existing, breathing in the cool evening air, lost in whatever memories haunted him. Dove approached the stall with the careful steps of someone who understood that true strength often wore the mask of gentleness. Tempest's ears flicked forward at the soft whisper of bare feet on sawdust, but he didn't lift his head. He'd grown accustomed to the small human who came each day, the one who never shouted commands or brandished ropes. She was different from the others, patient where they were demanding, quiet where they were loud, still where they were aggressive. Dove reached the stall door and stopped, her small hands grasping the rough wooden rail. She didn't speak, didn't make the clicking sounds that every other human seemed to think horses needed to hear. Instead, she simply stood there, breathing in rhythm with the great beast before her. Minutes passed, then an hour. The ranch settled into its nighttime quiet, punctuated only by the distant call of an owl and the soft rustle of hay as barn mice went about their business. Still, neither girl nor horse moved from their positions. It was Tempest who broke first. Slowly, almost imperceptibly, the stallion's massive head began to rise. His nostrils flared as he caught her scent. Soap and wildflowers, sadness, and hope mingled together in a combination he'd never encountered. There was no fear in her smell, no aggressive excitement, no ulterior motive, just a deep, aching loneliness that mirrored his own. Their eyes met across the dim space, green meeting brown in a moment of perfect recognition. Dove saw past the fury to the frightened colt who had lost everything. Tempest saw past the poverty-worn clothes to the fierce spirit that refused to be broken by circumstances beyond her control. "I know," Dove whispered, her voice barely audible above the evening breeze. "I know what it's like to have everyone leave." The stallion's ears swiveled toward her, catching every nuance of her tone. She wasn't talking to him like he was an animal, to be trained or a problem to be solved. She was talking to him like he was a friend who would understand. "My daddy used to say that some hearts are too big for this world," she continued, her fingers tracing patterns on the wooden rail. "That's why they hurt so much when pieces get torn away." Tempest took a step closer to the stall door, then another. His massive form seemed to fill the entire space, but Dove felt no fear. If anything, she felt safer than she had in months. "Everyone wants to ride you," she said, her voice gaining strength. "But maybe what you really need is someone who understands that some things aren't meant to be ridden. Some things are meant to be honored." The stallion stretched his neck toward her, his velvet muzzle stopping just inches from her outstretched palm. His breath was warm against her skin, and she could feel the rapid beat of his great heart even from this distance. Behind them, neither noticed Garrett emerge from his cabin to check on the horses one final time. The old foreman froze when he saw the scene before him. The untamable stallion and the quiet girl sharing a moment that seemed to bend the very air around them with its intensity. He'd seen horse whisperers before, men and women who claimed to understand the language of horses. But this was different. This wasn't manipulation or technique. This was recognition. Two souls finding kinship in their shared understanding of loss. Garrett started to approach, then stopped himself. Some moments were too sacred to interrupt, too fragile to contaminate with adult skepticism. Instead, he retreated to the shadows and watched as something miraculous began to unfold. Dove's hand finally made contact with Tempest's muzzle, and the stallion's eyes closed as if he'd been waiting his entire life for that gentle touch. No halter, no bridle, no ropes or whips, just skin against velvet, warmth against warmth, understanding against understanding. "Tomorrow," Dove whispered. "I'll come back tomorrow." The stallion watched her walk away into the darkness, his great head following her movement until she disappeared entirely. For the first time in 3 years, he didn't pace his stall or strike the walls. Instead, he stood quietly, replaying the feel of her touch, the sound of her voice, the promise in her words. The next evening brought an unexpected witness to their silent communion. Garrett had positioned himself deliberately in the shadows, his curiosity overcoming his usual respect for privacy. What he observed defied every principle of horsemanship he'd learned in 40 years of working with horses. Dove arrived at sunset, as she had promised. But this time, she carried something in her worn canvas bag, a handful of wild apples she'd gathered from the abandoned orchard behind her apartment complex. Not the expensive treats the other trainers brought, but something she'd found herself, something that cost nothing but time and effort. Tempest was waiting for her, standing alert at the stall door as if he'd been counting the hours until her return. When she approached, he nickered softly, the first sound he'd made in the presence of a human that wasn't rooted in anger or fear. "I brought you something," Dove said, producing one of the small, imperfect apples. "They're not pretty, but they're honest." She held the fruit on her open palm, and Tempest delicately lifted it with his lips, careful not to catch her skin with his teeth. As he crunched the apple, his eyes never left her face, and Dove found herself smiling for the first time. In weeks, this became their ritual. Each evening, as the sun painted the sky in brilliant colors, Dove would arrive with her simple offerings and her gentle presence. She never demanded anything of Tempest, never tried to put a halter on him or lead him from his stall. She simply existed in his space, sharing stories of her day, her dreams, her fears. She told him about the kids at school who whispered about her second-hand clothes and her mother's multiple jobs. She described the nights when the electricity got turned off, and they ate dinner by candlelight, pretending it was romantic instead of desperate. She shared her secret dream of becoming a veterinarian someday, of helping animals the way she wished someone would help them. Tempest listened to every word, his intelligent eyes reflecting an understanding that went beyond species. Sometimes he would rest his great head against the stall door while she spoke, and she would stroke his forehead, marveling at the trust. He was beginning to show her. On the 7th night of their friendship, something extraordinary happened. The stall door, which was usually latched tight to prevent Tempest's escape, had been left slightly ajar by one of the newer ranch hands. Garrett held his breath as he realized the error, knowing that the stallion could easily push through and run wild across the property. But Tempest didn't run. Instead, he nosed the door open just wide enough to step through, then stood calmly in the stable aisle, waiting for Dove's reaction. "You could go anywhere," she whispered, her heart racing at the implications. "You could run to the mountains. Be free." The stallion lowered his massive head until his forehead touched hers, a gesture so tender that Garrett felt tears prick his eyes. In that moment, both man and girl realized that Tempest had made his choice. Freedom wasn't about running away. It was about choosing where to stay. Dove's hands moved to the stallion's neck, feeling the powerful muscles beneath his silk-soft coat. Without saddle, without bridle, without any of the equipment that every other rider had demanded, she felt herself being invited into a partnership unlike anything she'd ever imagined. "Would you—" she started, then stopped, afraid to voice the impossible. "Would you let me?" Tempest's answer came not in words but in action. The great stallion moved closer to the stall wall, positioning himself so that Dove could easily climb onto his back. His body language spoke of patience, of invitation, of a trust so complete that it took her breath away. Garrett watched in amazement as the 12-year-old girl, who owned nothing but dreams and determination, prepared to achieve what seasoned professionals had failed to accomplish. In the growing darkness of the stable, surrounded by the scent of hay and the soft sounds of settling horses, a miracle was about to unfold. Dove's bare feet found purchase on the stall wall as she climbed slowly, carefully, every movement deliberate and respectful. Tempest stood statue still, his muscles relaxed despite the magnitude of what was happening. When she finally swung her leg over his broad back, settling gently onto his spine, both horse and rider seemed to exhale simultaneously. For a long moment, they simply existed together in perfect stillness. Dove's hands rested lightly on Tempest's neck, feeling the steady rhythm of his breathing, the warmth of his body beneath her. She had ridden horses before, old, gentle lesson horses at a summer camp she'd attended on scholarship, but this was entirely different. This felt like coming home to a place she'd never known she was searching for. Tempest's first step was tentative, experimental. He moved forward slowly, testing this new partnership, gauging Dove's balance and comfort. When she remained secure and calm, he took another step, then another. Soon they were walking smoothly around the inside of the stable, moving together, as if they'd been partners for years rather than minutes. From his hiding place, Garrett couldn't believe what he was witnessing. The same horse that had sent dozens of experienced riders to the hospital was carrying a slight girl with the care of a mother with her newborn. There was no fighting, no bucking, no attempt to unseat his rider. Instead, Tempest moved with a grace and gentleness that spoke of complete trust. "That's it," Dove whispered, her voice filled with wonder. "We're really doing this." As if responding to her words, Tempest began to extend his stride, moving from a walk to a smooth, floating trot. Dove had no saddle to grip, no stirrups for security, nothing but her natural balance and the connection between them. But she felt safer than she'd ever felt on solid ground. The stable doors stood open to the night air, and Tempest paused at the threshold, seeking permission. Dove leaned forward slightly, her voice barely a breath against his ear. "Let's see." "The stars," she said. They emerged into the moonlit pasture like a vision from another time. A barefoot girl on a magnificent stallion, moving together through silver grass under a canopy of diamonds. Tempest's hooves made no sound on the soft earth as he carried his precious cargo deeper into the night. The transformation in the stallion was remarkable. Gone was the wild, angry creature that had terrorized riders for 3 years. In his place was a horse that moved with purpose and joy. His head high, his stride elastic and powerful. He seemed to grow beneath Dove, becoming more than he had ever been alone. They rode for an hour through the moonlit landscape, exploring trails that wound through groves of oak and pine, crossing streams that sparkled like liquid silver in the starlight. Dove felt as though she were flying, her spirit soaring as high as the mountains that surrounded them. When they finally returned to the stable, both were changed. Dove's eyes shone with a confidence that had been missing since her father's death, while Tempest's entire demeanor had softened. The rage that had defined him for so long had transformed into something else: protectiveness, pride, purpose. As Dove slipped from his back, Tempest nuzzled her gently, his warm breath ruffling her dark hair. She wrapped her arms around his great neck, feeling the strong heartbeat that now seemed to match her own. "Tomorrow?" she asked, and his soft whinny was answer enough. Garrett waited until they had settled back into their evening routine before approaching. His weathered face bore an expression of awe that made him look decades younger. "I've been working with horses my whole life," he said quietly, "and I've never seen anything like that." Dove looked up at him, suddenly aware that their secret had been discovered. Fear flickered in her eyes, fear that she would be forbidden from returning, that this magical connection would be severed by adult concerns about liability and safety. But Garrett's next words surprised her. "That horse has been waiting for you his whole life," he said. "And I think maybe you've been waiting for him too." As the old foreman walked back to his cabin, he was already planning how he would convince the ranch owner that they had just witnessed something extraordinary. Not just a girl riding a horse, but the beginning of a partnership that could heal them both. 3 weeks passed before Garrett found the courage to approach his employer, Cornelius Ashford, with the truth about what was happening in the stables after dark. The ranch owner was a practical man who measured success in dollars and efficiency, not miracles and moonlight rides. But as reports of Tempest's violent episodes had ceased entirely, even he began to take notice. "I'm telling you, Cornelius," Garrett said, standing in the oak-paneled office that overlooked the main paddock, "this isn't just some lucky break. That girl has done something with Tempest that nobody else could manage." Ashford leaned back in his leather chair, his steel-gray eyes skeptical. "A 12-year-old cleaning lady's daughter succeeded where professional trainers failed? Garrett, you've been in the sun too long." "Come see for yourself tonight," Garrett challenged. "But watch from a distance, don't interfere." That evening, hidden behind the equipment shed, Ashford witnessed what would later become known as the Millbrook Miracle. He watched as Dove approached Tempest with nothing more than her gentle presence and a handful of meadow grass she'd picked during her walk to the ranch. He saw the stallion's transformation from guarded solitude to eager anticipation, and when the girl climbed onto Tempest's back without saddle or bridle, moving as one being across the moonlit pasture, Ashford felt his cynical heart crack open, just a little. But it was what happened next that truly stunned him. As Dove and Tempest returned from their night ride, another horse in the distance began to whinny frantically. Luna, a young mare who had been injured in a paddock accident months earlier, was lying on her side in obvious distress. The veterinarian had been called, but wouldn't arrive until morning, and the ranch hands had gone home for the day. Without hesitation, Dove slipped from Tempest's back and ran toward the paddock where Luna lay. The mare was in labor, a pregnancy no one had detected, complicated by her previous injuries. "She's scared," Dove said, her voice calm despite the urgency of the situation. "She doesn't understand what's happening." Ashford started to call out, to tell the girl to stay back and wait for professional help, but something in her demeanor stopped him. Dove approached the struggling mare with the same gentle confidence she showed with Tempest, her small hands moving with surprising knowledge as she assessed the situation. "Where did you learn to do that?" Garrett whispered, creeping closer. "I read everything I can find about animals," Dove replied, never taking her eyes off Luna. "The library has veterinary textbooks, and there are videos online at school. I've been studying since I was 8. What followed was 2 hours of careful, patient work, as Dove guided Luna through a difficult birth, her small hands gentle but sure, her voice a constant source of comfort for the frightened mare. Tempest stood nearby, as if understanding that his human needed to focus on another creature in need. When the foal finally arrived, a perfect filly with Luna's copper coat and bright, curious eyes, there wasn't a dry eye among the 3 adults who had witnessed the miracle. Dove sat back on her heels, exhausted but radiant, cradling the newborn as Luna nuzzled her baby with obvious gratitude. "Incredible," Ashford breathed, stepping into the light for the first time. "Simply incredible." Dove looked up, startled to see the ranch owner watching her. Fear flickered across her face, the same fear Garrett had seen weeks earlier when he'd first discovered her secret with Tempest. But Ashford's expression was warm, almost paternal. "Young lady," he said, "I think it's time we had a conversation about your future." The next morning, Ashford made a series of phone calls that would change everything. By noon, he had arranged for Dove to begin working at the ranch officially, not as her mother's helper, but as Tempest's exclusive caretaker and trainer. More importantly, he had contacted his old friend, Dr. Helena Voss, the state's most respected veterinarian, about taking on an extraordinary young apprentice. "She has something you can't teach," Ashford told Dr. Voss over the phone. "She has the gift." When Dove arrived that evening for what she thought would be another secret ride, Ashford was waiting with Garrett and a contract that would guarantee her mother a steady job, provide health insurance for both of them, and establish a trust fund for Dove's education. "There are conditions," Ashford said, watching as tears spilled down Dove's cheeks. "You'll work with Dr. Voss 3 days a week, learning proper veterinary skills. You'll continue your schooling and you'll maintain your grades, and most importantly, you'll never stop being exactly who you are with these horses." As if summoned by their conversation, Tempest appeared at the pasture gate, nickering softly for his human. The sight of them together, the damaged stallion and the gentle girl who had healed them both, filled Ashford with a satisfaction deeper than any business success he'd ever achieved. 5 years later, the Millbrook Valley Ranch had become famous throughout the equestrian world, but not for the reasons anyone might have expected. Visitors came not to see champion horses or luxurious facilities, but to witness something far more precious: the work of Dr. Dove Brightwater and her extraordinary partner, Tempest. At 17, Dove had already earned her veterinary assistant certification and had been accepted early admission to the state university's veterinary program. But more importantly, she had developed a revolutionary approach to horse therapy that combined traditional veterinary medicine with what she quietly called emotional healing. The program she'd created drew horses and their humans from across the country. Traumatized veterans found peace in the presence of gentle giants who understood the weight of loss. Children with disabilities discovered confidence astride horses that seemed to sense their special needs. Adults who had lost their way in life found purpose in learning to communicate without words. Tempest, now a magnificent stallion in his prime, had become the cornerstone of the program. He worked with the most difficult cases, horses whose spirits had been broken by neglect or abuse, humans whose hearts had been shattered by trauma or loss. His transformation from an angry, untouchable creature to a healer was legendary among those who knew his story. On this particular autumn evening, as golden leaves danced on the wind and the mountains glowed with alpenglow, Dove stood in the center of the main arena watching her latest success story. A young boy named River, who hadn't spoken since his parents' death in a car accident 6 months earlier, was grooming a gentle mare named Wistba. The child worked in silence, but his face showed the first hint of peace that his social worker had seen since the tragedy. "He's improving," said Mrs. Chen, the social worker, as she joined Dove at the arena fence. His foster parents say he's been sleeping through the night for the first time since the accident. Dove nodded, her heart full as she watched the healing taking place. Whisper lost her foal last spring, she said quietly. They understand each other's grief. From the pasture beyond, Tempest's call echoed across the valley. Not the angry scream of his youth, but a proud, joyful sound that spoke of contentment and purpose. He was calling to Luna's daughter, Symphony, who had grown into a beautiful mare and was now expecting her first foal. The circle of life continued, marked not by loss but by renewal. As the sun set behind the mountains, painting the sky in brilliant shades of rose and gold, Dove made her way to the pasture where Tempest waited. Now approaching 30, she had grown into a young woman of quiet strength and deep compassion, her face marked by the kind of wisdom that comes from understanding both suffering and joy. Tempest, though showing the first silver threads of age in his dark coat, remained magnificent. His eyes, still that startling shade of green, sparkled with intelligence and warmth as his beloved human approached. "Ready for our evening ride?" Dove asked, though she already knew the answer. As she had thousands of times before, she climbed onto his back without saddle or bridle, trusting completely in the bond that had saved them both. Together, they rode through the gathering dusk, two souls who had found in each other the healing they had never dared to hope for. Behind them, the ranch settled into evening quiet. In the main house, Maria Brightwater, now the ranch's head, of hospitality, prepared dinner for the guests and volunteers who had come to learn from her daughter's gift. In the cottage that Ashford had built for them, acceptance letters from veterinary schools across the country lay scattered on Dove's desk, each offering full scholarships to a young woman whose reputation had already spread far beyond the valley. But most precious of all was the letter that had arrived that morning from the International Association of Equine Therapy, formally recognizing the Brightwater method as a breakthrough in animal-assisted healing. The letter spoke of awards and honors, of speaking engagements and research opportunities, of a future bright with possibility. As they crested the hill that overlooked the entire valley, Dove leaned forward to whisper in Tempest's ear. "We did." "Dewey," she said, her voice filled with wonder at the journey they had traveled together. "We found our way home." Tempest's soft nicker seemed to carry on the evening breeze, a sound of perfect contentment that echoed across the mountains and valleys, a testament to the power of patience, understanding, and the unbreakable bond between two hearts that had chosen to heal together. In the distance, Symphony whinnied to her unborn foal. Luna grazed peacefully in the moonlight, and somewhere in the darkness, a healing was beginning for another broken soul who would find their way to Millbrook Valley, drawn by the legend of the girl who spoke to horses, and the stallion who had been waiting his whole life for someone to truly understand his heart.